Thanks for having me today. Um, and I appreciate this because what I do is I work with entrepreneurs and only with people who are ambitious and forward thinking. So hopefully you all feel that that's what you're doing. And it's also people that are open-minded to new ways of thinking about what they're doing. So I started my business in actually 1987, the day the stock market crashed in October. I think it was October 21st or something. It was the very first day. Not an auspicious beginning, but we've been working with entrepreneurs now for almost 40 years. And the most important thing that we figured out that is the most important thing to have as a business owner is a big idea and a vision for the future business of your dreams. Okay. So, because what can happen is when we're an entrepreneur, we start off with lots of energy and excitement, and then eventually it's like we're become a manager. We're not longer an entrepreneur. We stop growing because we're just managing what we have as opposed to thinking about what the next thing is. So my question that I want you to think about is, what is the big idea for the future business of your dreams? So this is a suggestion here of what you might consider as part of that dream. So the first thing is to say, well, in the future, I'd like to make 10 times more money. So how many of you would like to do that? Anybody would not want to do that? I guess no. Okay, it's a rhetorical question. But also work 50% less. So this is the trick actually that we figured out. If you make those two goals together, then you got to do something different. You can't just keep doing the same old thing. You got to innovate somehow. Something's got to change if you're going to make that happen. Because you can always work more or you can work less, but you'll either make more or less money or work more. But you do this, something's got to change. But also have 100 times more fun running your business. I started off in 1987, and by 1997, I had a successful business. I had 30 people working for me. I had an office on Church Street downtown. By all measure, I was a success, but I wasn't actually having that much fun because I was dealing with all the issues around running the business. So if I was helping people with big ideas, that was only maybe 10% of the time. And the other 90% of the time, I was just managing the business. So this is a little trap that we can fall into. Maybe some of you feel that way, right? And I wasn't really making as much money as I wanted to. So I started thinking about, maybe I have to change the way I think. So ultimately, I completely rethought what a business means. And I came up with this term called new factory thinking. But up to that point, I'd use what I call old factory thinking to run my business. And this was a different way of thinking called new factory thinking. So in the time I have here, the 20 minutes, I'm going to explain to you this different way of thinking that will enable you to achieve those goals and create the future business of your dreams. This is what everyone that I've worked with has told me, that this new way of thinking was the key. Because if you want to get ahead, to use your same old thinking may not get you there. So it's actually how we think about business on a deep level that could make all the difference for you. And it sounds complicated because we're talking about thinking, but it isn't really that complicated, actually. It's actually quite simple. But I wrote a book about that called The New Factory Thinker. And a lot of people have read that book and said that really completely changed everything for them. Like they said, okay, I've been really caught up in an old way of going about things, and you've given me a whole different way. And I can see opportunities that I couldn't see before. I had one client call me up in the morning and say, I'm mad at you, Bill, because I couldn't sleep last night. I said, what happened? He says, well, now that I've learned this, I've had so many ideas about ways I could make money and so on that I just never had thought of before. And I said, yeah, it's because you're thinking about infinity now. Like there's so many things that you could do that you were being held back with before. So you might want to read that one. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to sell lobster in a second. That's probably my most popular book, by the way. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So the question then is, are you using old factory thinking or new factory thinking in your business? So old factory thinking is essentially when you tell your elevator pitch, which you're going to do it in a minute, I think, because you're all going to introduce yourself. You're probably going to tell us what product and service you sell and what industry you're in. And that's old factory thinking. New factory thinking is when you tell me who you're trying to help and all the different ways that you're trying to help them, and you're not actually in any particular industry. So I don't know if you can see behind me here, but I have an Apple computer. Like I worked with Apple in the 80s before I started my business. I was essentially their spokesperson in the 80s in Canada. And at that time, I know I'd say, well, what's Apple? I say, well, it's a computer company, right? So they were using old factory thinking back then. But, by the end of the 90s, they were almost out of business. And then they became a new factory when they started selling music and phones and all these other things that initially people were saying, well, that's crazy. Why are you selling all that other stuff? And they said, well, we're just trying to help our customers in any way we can. And we're building a value, I call it a value hub around them. So they're not in any particular industry anymore. They still sell computers and a lot of computers, but they don't define themselves by that product or by that industry anymore. They're just Apple trying to help their customers in whatever way they can. And this is why this thinking that Apple uses and many other companies like that can really help you open up your mind to all kinds of new ways to make money. Okay. Now, one of the traps of being in old factory thinking is that you have this product, but it's kind of like a hot dog because you're selling the same thing as so many other people in your industry or marketplace. So that makes whatever you're selling a commodity. So another job I had was when I was 16, I worked on the Toronto Island and I sold hot dogs all summer long. And I learned two things. One is you don't want to eat hot dogs. That's not good for you. So I never ate very many hot dogs since. And secondly, you don't actually make a lot of money selling hot dogs because the owner told me that even though they sold like 1 million hot dogs that summer, he actually didn't make that much money because he might have made only like 5 cents on every hot dog because he couldn't charge that much for the hot dog. So what we do is help people go from having a hot dog business where you're selling commodity to having a gourmet business when you're running a gourmet restaurant. And that's when you can start making 10 times more money, work half as much, and have 100 times more fun because it's a lot more fun to do that, right? So everyone I met, every entrepreneur I've ever met is capable of being a gourmet chef, but 99% of them go to work every day and sell hot dogs and they get stuck there and they can't think of a way out. So we need to have a way out. Okay. This is really important because you really could get stuck there. And I worry about this more than ever because of artificial intelligence, which I also wrote a book about, is that all the hot dog businesses are going to get automated by AI, and that will outcompete you completely. And as a human, you won't be able to keep up with that. So the only choice is to have a gourmet type of business. So the trick here is to start thinking differently. So if we think about Apple in 1998, and you were in a meeting and they were trying to think, how do we sell more computers? And someone said, well, I think that we should sell music. Now we know that ultimately was a good idea. But if you were in that meeting, how would you have voted on that idea? And I know for myself, I would have said, no, that's a bad idea. We're not in the ad industry. We don't know anything about music. We need to focus on our product because that's what we do. But fortunately, they decided to sell music and, might not have worked out, but in that case it did, right? And once it did, they couldn't really say, well, we're a computer company like we can't say that. And then when somebody suggests, well, maybe we should sell phones, well, that was a possibility. And then they said, well, maybe we should sell watches. Well, sure, maybe we could do that too. So suddenly their mind was open to going beyond that particular product or service. This is absolutely the hardest part of everything I talk about and work with my clients. But once they get this through this, the whole world opens up to them, because then they realize there's so many ways that I could make money from working with people. Okay. So Apple got out of that trap. So to reiterate, the old factory thinking, it ultimately leads you to having a hot dog business, which is a low margin, high volume, potentially, hopefully, business where you work a lot and you don't make as much money as you could. And because you have so much competition. And it's also a trap because you can't think beyond the hot dog, right? You think, I don't know, what else could I do, right? And you're certainly not thinking about being a gourmet chef. Now, gourmet chef type of business is when you sell something new, better, and different that takes everything to a much higher level that people can only get from you and will only ever be able to get from you. And that's why I call my company the Big Idea Company, because I say we all can be gourmet chefs. We all can come up with a big idea, and don't let this hot dog business hold you back, because it really wasn't, you weren't really meant to just get stuck at the hot dog stand. It's just that you've set up a whole business around yourself that makes you feel like you're stuck there. But that's why I call it a trap, because you actually don't need to be stuck there. Okay. Now I tell this to lots of people and they go, hey, wait, I'm not in a hot dog business. You know, you're insulting me, right? And I go, yeah, well, it's not meant to be an insult. It's just a metaphor, but it is to make you think about your business, right? So this one fellow I was working with, he was a financial advisor. He sold life insurance, and he said, oh, and he was from North Bay, and he said, I don't have a hot dog business. That's crazy, you know. But a month later, he called me back and he says, Bill, I've got a hot dog business. I realize now. I say, why? He said, well, actually, I think I'm running the best hot dog stand in North Bay as a financial advisor. But my best friend, who's like really pretty lazy, doesn't work that hard, anywhere near as hard as me, doesn't have anywhere near as good a business, just got this huge client. And now he's taking the whole summer off and he got this huge commission for this life insurance he sold him. And I'm going to be working all summer running this hot dog stand, and I need to figure out how to get out of this. And I said, why didn't you get that big client yourself? And he said, it's too busy running my hot dog stand to see that bigger opportunity that was right in front of me. So, so this is why, you know, what really big ideas are about is finding new ways to make money. So I meet so many people. It's like, let's say they're selling hammers, okay, and they go, yeah, I'm selling hammers, and it's a pretty tough business because there's lots of other people selling hammers. And then they find out that people actually would also like to buy screwdrivers. And they say, well, that's fine, but I don't sell screwdrivers. And I said, yeah, but you can make a lot of money doing that. No, we sell hammers. We're a hammer company. We don't sell screwdrivers. And I say, well, you're either in the business selling hammers or you're in the business of making money. Which is it going to be? And unfortunately, most people then go back to, well, I sell hammers. That's who I am. But they could make a lot of money selling screwdrivers and not even have to own a screwdriver factory. They could just team up with somebody that owns one, but they get stuck on, I sell hammers. So this is what I'm really here to do, is just to talk about new ways to make money. Now, I'm going to give you one example in the time I have, but before I do that, I'm going to give you my example, which is why I started this business in the first place. Because in 1980, after doing the hot dogs and other things like that, I ended up working at the Keg restaurant, and I won this lobster contest. I sold 1,400 lobsters. I was a waiter there. It was young in Eglinton, and I sold 1,400 lobsters over 6 months. And the second waiter sold 90 lobsters. And all the waiters and the manager and everybody, they all wanted to know how I was doing it. I said, well, no, I'm not going to tell you how I did it. But it was my first big idea. And so I did something different here. I essentially had this idea of saying, I'm not going to keep doing it the same way, because I tried the regular way, which is, hey, you want to buy a lobster? Like, Tammy was saying, the suggestive selling thing. And that really didn't work because they just saw me as a salesperson. So I went up to the table and I just said something slightly different, and they all bought it from me. So at least 1,400 people. So I'm going to tell you what that was in a minute. But what I did was I wrote that book, How to Sell Lobster, and people read that and go, okay, well, I never would have thought of that, actually, I don't think. But now that you've told me, it makes so much sense that you would present your product that way, because I didn't actually change the product. I just changed the idea that I was using. Now, I have many, many examples of what people have done with this idea, but I'm going to start with one of the strategies that we use, which is to talk about the gourmet idea. So, this is that's our fifth strategy: assume a premium position in the marketplace. And a lot of people are scared to do that because they think, well, if I start raising my prices or something, I'm not gonna get any customers, right? And that's what Meta Keating thought. She's an office designer. She designs office space. And I said, well, how much do you charge, Meta? She says, well, I charge typically $10,000. That's what I give people a quote for. And I said, because I said, why is that? So, well, I just comfortable with that. I said, why don't you charge more? I said, well, no, I'm scared I might scare people away. And I said, well, what if we do this? What if we were to have three choices? So we'll have your $10,000, $25,000, and $100,000. And the basic will be $10,000. Your program, which we call the Office Alive solution, will be $25,000. And if they join that, they become what we call a member. And if you want to be a super member, it's $100,000. Now she was like, there's no way anybody's going to pay $100,000. Okay. Well, within a month, Mozilla, the internet company, which came into Toronto to open up 2 floors of a building, hired her for the $100,000. And she was just, well, delightfully surprised, but very surprised. And she asked them, so why did you hire me? And she says, well, because you were the most expensive. And also you had this great idea about Office Alive solution. We like that. That's why we hired you, because you were the most expensive and we saw you as the best. Obviously, you're the best if you're the most expensive. So she had spent the previous 15 years trying to keep her price down. And now she's getting paid $25,000 or $100,000 from a lot of her clients because she's just giving them that choice. Okay. So that's essentially what I did with the lobster. I went up to the table and I said, you have a choice. You can have the basic steak or you can have the special, which is a steak and lobster. What do you want to have? And the people thought about it for a second and said, well, I'll have the special. And then I thought about it. I thought, why are they saying yes to that? And I realized, one, I gave them a choice between something sort of basic and something more premium, right? So that was a good, like, now you got to decide. But also, if you order the basic, then they were going to be a basic person and have a basic dinner or a basic office party or a basic birthday party. But if they ordered the special, they'd be a special person and they'd have a special office party and a birthday party, and they would be special. And so they were willing to pay more and buy more because they like the idea of that better. So all I had done was change the idea that I put out there. I didn't change the lobster. So you don't have to change what you're doing. You just repackage the idea of what you're putting out there. Okay. So this is actually really easy to do. You don't have to reinvent your business. You just have to say, what idea am I really putting out there right now? What idea are people getting about me? Maybe I should change that idea, repackage myself so that people get a different idea. So when I do my elevator pitch in a group like this, they hear that and they go, oh, well, you're a cut above everyone else. You have something special. If I get that thing, I'm going to be special. I can't get that anywhere else. And it sounds very compelling. And I want to meet with you. That's what you want to do when you have your opportunity to speak in a networking meeting and all the other ways that you do marketing. So as I say, I only had a little bit of time to tell you about all this, but if you wanted to talk to me about this, I just put a link in the chat. Okay. And you can schedule an hour with me if you want. There's no fee for it. And I'll help you come up with your big idea in that session for free. Okay. And so there's no obligation beyond that. You could go in my program if you want, but you don't have to. You can just come and do this with me. And all the ideas that that idea anyway, with Meta, that all, I cooked that all up with her, pardon the pun, in that 60 minutes. Okay. So, and then I can also, if you sign up for that, you'll get a link and you can watch a video that explains all of this in more detail in preparation for the session. It'll also give you more examples of this. And there's a scorecard you can fill out that will help you assess where you are right now, sort of like vis-a-vis hot dog gourmet. And it'll just give you some starting point to work with. So if any of you want to do that, I'd be more than delighted to do it with you. And like I say, the homework is in itself is extremely valuable. So you might want to consider that. Okay.